Hey there, welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy what you're about to see, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means a lot. Let's jump right in. During an annual sales meeting, a brand new employee sat next to the CEO. He proceeded to lay his head on the table and fall asleep. In the middle of the meeting, when lunchtime arrived, they woke him up just to let him know he was fired. Our office was shut down due to COVID, and the company transitioned to fully remote work. A new senior engineer was hired to collaborate with the product team and oversee a group of developers. During a company-wide weekly Zoom call, he finished presenting and turned off his camera but forgot to mute himself. Over 100 employees heard him playing Fortnite, making negative comments about the company, and more. He didn't last beyond a month. At my previous job, we had a shared email inbox. One coworker, who was terrible at his role and completely untrustworthy, had a habit of sending emails in a distinct font and color. One day, he emailed a customer from the shared inbox, but used my signature to make it seem like I had sent it. However, he didn't change the font or color, which gave him away. It wasn't long before he was let go. When I was in the Navy, there was this well-known idiot who was also a compulsive liar. He was assigned to armed watch duty with an M14 rifle, patrolling the topside decks. The job only required him to walk around with the weapon for 4 hours. This guy returned to the quarterdeck, the main entryway to the ship, without his rifle. He claimed it fell off his shoulder into the water while he was tying his shoe. Somehow, the rifle supposedly slipped past his hands and went through 3 lifelines, like guardrails, into the sea. I suspect he was attempting fancy drill team moves, tossing it into the air, and ended up losing it that way. Someone tried to fish his lighter out of a deep fryer using his bare hands. Cleaning up after that was an absolute nightmare. At the factory where I worked producing N95 masks, everything ground to a halt one night. A coworker who was operating the machine that shaped the basic form of the masks decided to clear a jam. Ignoring the sign that said, "Do not put your hand in this part of the machine," and removing a clearly labeled safety cover that warned, "No, seriously, don't remove this," he stuck his hand into the machine. What happened next was straight out of Mount Doom. His hand was badly injured, and the factory, which was the size of an IKEA, was shut down for half a shift. At a non-profit I worked for, we hired a fundraiser solely for his network of connections. His actual job performance didn't matter, as long as he kept bringing wealthy donors to events. When the pandemic forced us to go remote, his lack of tech skills became glaringly obvious. He had managed for years in the office by relying on phone calls and avoiding email. We were preparing for our first big online fundraiser, and I warned my boss that this guy didn't know how to use Zoom. He never muted himself, had the camera pointed up his nose, and treated the calls like he was watching a YouTube video. But my boss dismissed my concerns, not wanting to upset him since he was bringing in the rich attendees. During the event, attended by over 200 people, he placed his laptop on a bathroom counter and proceeded to take a loud, shirtless bathroom break, complete with grunts and splashes. The noise was so disruptive they had to end the event early because there was no way to mute him. It lasted 2 unbearable minutes, they gave up. I almost threw my laptop out the window that night. Someone attempted to cool down hot oil in a mobile chute, ready to be emptied, by pouring in a large bucket of water. I heard someone shout, "Thomas, no!" just as I turned around to witness a geyser of scalding oil shooting to the ceiling before splashing down. Miraculously, no one was hurt. For context, the chute was on wheels with a wooden handle, so cooling it wasn't necessary at all. In a pharmacy where I worked, a pharmacist administered a flu shot to a customer, but accidentally disposed of the used syringe in the container, holding unused syringes instead of the proper disposal bin. Another pharmacist later reached in to grab a new syringe and ended up pricking themselves with the used one. This sparked absolute chaos. At my job, the designer, creative director, and head of production all overlooked the fact that a calendar we were creating had an 8-day week. We sent 10,000 defective copies to a client who understandably refused to pay for them. Our project manager, who was notoriously incompetent, had an extensive record of poor decisions. The most memorable was when he insisted on delivering a $3,000 shipment of fertilizer as planned, despite warnings from the supplier about heavy rains expected that day. Within hours, the entire shipment was washed away. While working as a radiation protection technician at a power plant during a refueling period, my job was to monitor tools leaving a contaminated area. I had to ensure no radioactive particles were present by wiping the tool with the tissue and testing it on a device called a frisker. If the frisker needle crossed a certain threshold, the tool required cleaning or had to stay in the area. One day, I returned to relieve a colleague who had been on duty for 2 hours. He told me everything was fine and there were no issues. I looked at the frisker, leaned over, and realized he hadn't even turned the machine on. One of my team members missed a 9 a.m. meeting. When I asked why, he replied, "You said it was at 12, not 9. Confused, I checked the meeting invite, which clearly stated 9 a.m., as everyone else knew. He sent me a screenshot of his calendar, and it turned out he had everything set to the wrong time zone. At the paint shop where I worked, I always asked about the hazards of new chemicals. Management consistently assured me that any new product was green and perfectly safe. Even safe for babies, they'd say. One day, I entered the shop to find a coworker using a new spray chemical. The bucket clearly labeled it as highly toxic and corrosive. I warned him to wear gloves and a mask. He dismissed my concern, saying, "It's baby safe. There's even a picture of a baby playing in it." When I looked closer, I yelled, "That's not a baby playing or swimming. He's dying." This wasn't exactly incompetence, but it was certainly an entrance. A new employee, on their very first day working remotely, somehow managed to delete the production team's entire Dropbox directory. This included 25 TB of video, design, and production files. It took 2 stressful weeks of coordination with Dropbox to recover everything. The new hire was understandably mortified throughout the process. At a small company where I worked, the chief accounting officer, who also happened to be the sole accountant, had an unusual method for working in Excel. She would manually input numbers into 2 cells, then use a calculator to add them, and type the result into a 3rd cell. Her spreadsheets contained thousands of rows, and she'd been doing this for years. I taught her how to use formulas, but months later I saw her using the calculator again. A coworker at the golf course once mowed the grass on every green without attaching the mower blade. I worked in produce at a grocery store for 12 years. One day I got paged to the receiving dock to assist the grocery manager. A grocery delivery had just arrived, but the driver hadn't used a load lock. which is a bar placed across the truck to stabilize the load when it's not full. As a result, 9 pallets of product had toppled over and were destroyed. My job was to document the damage with my phone while the grocery manager contacted the distribution center. The driver was fired on the spot, and we confiscated the truck keys. He then had to figure out how to get home, which was a 4-hour drive from our location. He kept complaining that it wasn't his fault and argued that independent drivers shouldn't be required to supply their own load locks. However, the warehouse would have gladly loaned him one if he had asked. He just didn't. This oversight caused $10,000 in damage, cost him his job, and ruined his chances of driving commercially in the state. Someone decided to pour hot fryer oil into a plastic container. You can imagine how that ended.